let's talk childhood, not like in a weird therapy kind of way, but what was your childhood like? What were your parents like? Were they involved? Were they around a lot? What was it like for you? I was a pretty good kid. I was a pretty well-behaved kid, which is weird because I'm the second born, and they always say that like the second born is the holy terror, the crazy one. It's a little bit switched in my family, but my brother is not crazy, but he was all boy growing up. And so I felt like when I was around some of the same teachers, all of that stuff, that I had to kind of like redeem the family name a little bit. So I always did my best to be very well behaved and to not mess anything up. But every kid makes mistakes and every kid needs a little bit of guidance. My mom, for most of my life, was a stay-at-home mom. And much of my childhood, not the whole thing, but much of my childhood, she was a stay-at-home mom. So that meant that when we would get in trouble, when things would happen, she was the first to deal with us. My dad, however, he dealt with things a little bit differently, where mom would come in and you never questioned how my mother felt. She made it very clear. She used her words, sometimes loudly. My dad, he didn't have a whole lot of words. When he would come in and deal with us or discipline us, it usually focused on 3 words. I'm so disappointed. And those 3 words would cut like a dagger. It was like I almost would prefer my mom's very verbose statements to my dad's one little statement. And I can remember this one time I got in trouble for lying. It was not the first time either. And I had this little plaque up in my room that had my name on it, Kylie, and it had like a definition, a Christian definition for what my name meant, which was integrity, is still integrity. And I remember getting busted for lying. I don't remember what I lied about, but I remember my mom coming in and using her words. And then she asked a question. She pointed to that plaque on the wall and she said, "Do you think you deserve to have this plaque up on your wall in light of what you've done?" It's kind of brilliant parenting, because she didn't say, "You did this terrible thing, you don't deserve this." Instead, she invited me into how she was thinking about this. And I was like, okay, that was a sobering thought. And then she followed that question up with the statement, "Wait till your father gets home." So then I sat in my room waiting for my dad to get home and praying all day long while I waited. God, I don't want to hear him tell me he's disappointed. I don't want to hear those words anymore. I don't want to have to deal with that. And then the next thing I know, the door opens and my father appears. Without a word, not even really a glance in my direction, he walks into my room, goes over to that plaque on the wall, takes it down, and exits. Not a word was spoken. Remember, I said this was not my first offense. I don't think there were really any more words left to say at this point. It was time for an action. And all day I had been praying, I don't want to hear my dad say he's disappointed. But as it turns out, hearing nothing from my father was way worse than hearing those 3 words. Silence can be really hard for us to process, right? Silence can be really difficult. When we get the silent treatment from somebody, we don't know what they're thinking. We don't know what's going on. And you feel like, okay, at least just say something, say anything that you can start a conversation. You can start a dialogue when you know that you've disappointed someone, when you know that you've let someone down. And then there's moments where you don't get that opportunity. The Israelites actually dealt with this also. So when we read the book of Amos, we see God's judgment on not just Israel, but the surrounding areas as well, because of the things that they had done wrong. They were really living quite lavishly at the expense of others. They weren't caring for people well. They were really being unfaithful to what God had called them to do and the people that he had called them to be. It was beyond just like living wealthy kinds of lives or kind of luxurious, exhaustive kind of lives, it was more so that they did that with other people paying the price for it. So rather than serving the poor, they're kind of mocking the poor and they're profiting off of the poor, those kinds of things, just really awful, dehumanizing, totally devaluing things. And so God comes in and he renders judgment. And then we get to Amos chapter 8. I want to read this for us in verse 11. And it says, "The time is surely coming, says the sovereign Lord, when I will send a famine on the land, not a famine of bread or water, but of hearing the words of the Lord." The silent treatment. And that was speaking of a time that was to come. It was not going to be in the next, few days or anything there, but it did eventually come. And in this time, we had 400 years of exile, 400 years of not hearing a word from the Lord. Imagine what that would have felt like. For the Israelites, a word from God meant their direction, their guidance, their next steps. It meant comfort. It meant peace. And all of that was stripped away for 400 years. It's really easy for us to look back and go, okay, that happened 400 years and just take it as a historical fact. But let's put this in perspective. 400 years ago from 2024, William Shakespeare had recently died. 400 years ago from 2024, the Mayflower landed at Plymouth Rock. The King James Version of the Bible was brand new and very relevant. Now, imagine how much has happened in our world and in our society from those events that I just described to where we are now, and put that in the position of what the Israelites would have dealt with. Think of how much life would have been lived. There would have been generations that lived and died without ever hearing a word from the Lord. In fact, in verse 10, God says it's going to be as though your only son died. Imagine what that would have felt like. Your only son died. Well, why does that matter? Because Abraham's covenant with the Lord, that extended, God's promise extended to Abraham's descendants. So if your only son dies, that's the end of a family line, which means there's an end of that being grafted into that covenant that God had with Abraham. And so that's the level of mourning that they're dealing with in this, as though their only son had died, as though the promise is going to feel like it's been removed. But it hadn't. God also says in chapter 9, the day is coming that I'm going to bring you back from exile. And in fact, those people will never again be uprooted from their land. That's what he's saying. It will come when they get brought back from exile. But even that isn't because the people deserved it. That's because God is faithful to his word. Because God had promised King David that there would always be someone of his lineage on the throne. And so he has to honor that promise. Even when we are not faithful to God, he is still faithful to his word. He never lets down his end of the bargain. And I've been thinking a lot about this in the sense that how do we avoid that silent treatment with the Lord? What are the things that we do, or the things that we think, the things that we say that can get us into that place where we feel like we don't hear him anymore? And how do we stoke the fire? How do we stoke the flames of our relationship with God so that we don't have to feel distant, so that we don't have to feel like we've been in exile? We stay sensitive to him. We obey him. We think about the things that he tells us to think about, whatever is true, whatever is pure, whatever is noble, whatever is trustworthy. Think about those things, whatever is trustworthy. Isn't that really just him? Because even when we are unfaithful, he is still faithful. So there's a comfort knowing that even in the midst of a silent moment, even in the midst of a silent season, God is going to bring his people back. He's going to keep his promise. Let that be the encouragement that we need.